google.com has not changed in how long with the same I'm feeling lucky button. They radically changed it. I had goosebumps.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Hooman Radfar. And welcome to another episode of Startup Podcast Reacts. On today's show, we're going to talk about OpenAI raising $40 billion. $40 billion. We're also going to talk about the CoreWeave IPO and market volatility. Has the bubble popped? Is it continuing to pop? Is it all going to zero? Are we all going to lose our shirts? We're going to tell you exactly what's going to happen next. We're also going to talk about ChatGPT's 4.0 image generation. Man, this thing is really cool. Is it the end of artists and artwork as we know it? We're going to talk about Gemini 2.5 Pro. We're going to talk about Google's new AI mode and the radical shifts that are happening in search and what it means for that business and for the way you SEO and compete in a very crowded space. And then we're also going to talk about OpenAI supporting MCP, Model Context Protocol, which helps you get your personal data into the model so it can be more useful. All of that and much, much more on today's show. Stay tuned after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. The first thing we wanted to talk about today is the thing that everyone is talking about on the internet, which is that ChatGPT, within their existing 4.0 model, have unleashed a completely new image generation tool. And it's way, way, way better than the previous one, and way, way, way better really than any of the non-specialized image generation tools out there. And, you know, I think, at least for me, and guys, I'd love to get your thoughts. It feels like it's finally crossed that uncanny valley from, hey, this is generating cool images that are not actually that useful, to images that are like, wow, this is really impressive. And I can see how I can use this in my life and in my work in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's better in the sense that the images are better, although it's got a little of that depending on the model you're comparing it to. I think where it's more interesting is that it's far more precise. So you can ask for very, very specific things, and it more or less will follow your instructions quite closely. And then perhaps even more importantly, you can ask for very, very specific changes to some degree. And the demo is that it worked better than it's working for me. It will keep the other elements consistent while changing just the thing you wanted to change. And so, for example, we might say, generate an image of a cow. And you might say, okay, I want that same image, but with a transparent background. Okay, now I want the cow purple. And in theory, and I'm stressing in theory because it doesn't always work, the cow will be the same, but the background will be transparent, and then the cow will be the same, and the background will stay transparent, but then the cow will go purple. And so that it's become really much more of a utility, a tool that designers or at least people with an intent can follow. And I think that's the key. Is sometimes intent gets lost in these models. It sometimes just lets go of your intent and starts to go off a little bit on a tangent. It forgets some of the prior context, the prior constraints. And I'm talking the text responses as well as the image responses. Straight after launching that with image generation, they also, I believe there was sort of like a model upgrade in there where they actually made 4.0 generally more directable and more obedient, if you will. And so the overall thing is a little bit hews closer to your intent, stops drifting off your intent. We've already started using it for our thumbnails. We've already offloaded some of our thumbnail work to other more creative, more higher end work. So I'm very excited about it. It's very cool. What do you reckon, Hooman?
Look, the internet was on fire, right? And I think Sam was joking around that here, the servers were proverbially melting. They might quite literally have been melting. I don't know how they set up the processing there, but I can tell you, I think for me, what the signal is they're serious. They're going to invest in this as a core capability. And I think we kind of alluded to this earlier in some of our chats. If I'm a startup and I was working on image generation, I'm thinking twice about the future. It really, really is a great capability. And to your point, it's not perfect. I also, spent quite a bit of time playing around with it. For the first time, it feels like you can direct it a bit. I also had that same kind of aha, because, when you were using Dolly and whatnot, you would sit there and just like over and over again. And I just found myself defaulting down and going using some of these better tools like a Midjourney or what have you. But now I think I can actually do quite a bit more work within the ChatGPT ecosystem, and that's new for me. I usually have to go to these other tools and specialized models, and so that could also be the beginning of a sea change where you do stay within their ecosystem. You don't have to go to some of these specialized models and tools, which, again, back to if I'm a smaller startup, and small these days it might not be that small, but I wouldn't want to be someone who raised $100 million against these guys if they're going down that road.
Yeah, and I know that's something, Hooman, you wanted to return to a bit later in this episode, but yeah, I completely agree. This thing is now, you can use it to design social media ads and, do mock-ups and prototypes. Classic disruption, right? I think before, for most cases, the tool just wasn't quite there. Like, it was a novelty and a gimmick, right? Like, when DALL-E 2 came out, everyone like started doing AI generated images on their social media posts, and then realized that they just made them look like AI slop, and they stopped doing it. This time, like, oh, okay, this is just gonna, it's definitely gonna kill stock photography. It's also gonna kill a whole bunch of low end design work, and that's classic disruption, right? Because sure, the designers can continue to move up market, but it's dangerous. And definitely if you're a startup that is trying to also disrupt things like design, then you're in a very dangerous situation, because ChatGPT is really pretty good.
We mentioned the startups, but also think of, you look at Firefly with Adobe, you look at some of the larger players with their homegrown models. I have to believe that they're probably reconsidering how and where do they invest versus partner with these OpenAIs, given the pace of innovation. I mean, it's a materially better experience. And to your point, Yaniv, it was a toy, in my opinion. Like, you would play around with it, and everyone would be posting these AI generated images, and it was fun, and you can use them but it wasn't really something that I think people are using seriously. I think people will use this more seriously. And I think because of that I don't know if it's a next version or one more version, you can see the terminal point for this. And so I do think the other implication is, if you're a larger company, mid-sized company, and you were thinking about doing something internally, you might be rethinking and saying, hey, maybe we do have to use their API. Maybe we should just bet on their rate of change on progress versus us doing it internally.
It's becoming a designer that you can give direct instructions to, and the designer, follows those instructions. The phrase that keeps coming to mind for generative AI stuff these days is the uncanny valley. We talk about it on many of the shows. I think a couple of shows ago, we talked about the uncanny valley with voice. Now we're talking about the uncanny valley with essentially a designer. And as you said, when you first see these things, the first few generations, it's miraculous and it's exciting and it looks so cool. But when you go to use it for real utility, real use cases, you realize it's actually in that uncanny valley where it's not directable, it's not precise, it's got this weird sheen to it. But now it's becoming a tool. It's maturing. It's precise. And one other aspect none of us have talked about yet is it's capable of generating text. So if you've ever used these things in the past, it creates essentially like just weird symbols that sometimes look like text, but the words are broken. It's sort of like what it used to do with fingers and arms. All of a sudden you have a sixth finger or a third, only three fingers. And so it would never really generate text with any kind of consistency. And now it's able to actually write out entire paragraphs of text as part of the image. And that's just wholly new and incredibly valuable and powerful. So just to button this up for what we're doing on the show, for example, we have a thumbnail team, and they spend a lot of time making thumbnails. The instructions then now is, if we can zero out your thumbnail work and get you guys to do other really creative graphic design work that you weren't doing before to make the show more productive, that's what we want to do. So we need you guys to get really great with this tool and basically work yourself out of a job here so that we can do something else more productive. And I think companies, they're not going to want to go shed their stuff. They're going to want to ask themselves, how do we get 10x more productive here? And that's the promise of the 10x, 100x AI economy. And so let's see what happens.
Just before we move on from this image generation, there's one other topic within that scope that I wanted to discuss, which is We're talking about how this is really serious and useful, but of course, the internet being the internet, what happened was a massive flourishing of memes when this happened. And the meme that really took over the most was this sort of Ghiblify everything. So for those who are familiar with Studio Ghibli, is a sort of Japanese high art animation studio. And it turns out that ChatGPT, the new image model, is really good at taking any random image or any concept and making it look like Studio Ghibli. And that spread everywhere on the internet. And it was cute and fun. But then there was a backlash, right? Both from Studio Ghibli itself and from many artists talking about, in a sense, this copyright theft, or is it copyright theft? This idea that the models were trained on the work of Studio Ghibli. I think that is the case, given the fidelity of the generation, without their permission. And now art is being generated in the style of Studio Ghibli. And is this cheapening art? Is this copyright theft? Is it the end of human art? Like, where do we stand on all of this?
I think this is going to be probably one of the biggest, it represents a larger debate on what is IP and what do we own and where the boundaries start and stop. I mean, we had this in music. We've had this in art already. This is I would say continuation. Like when there's the classic, Vanilla Ice with the backbeat of Queen and like what point, I mean, it's a baseline, right? Like how much can you own, right? And so in some cases, the courts have found that, okay, you can. And actually, I think there was some payment that had to be made by Vanilla Ice's record label to these folks. But, when I look at this group, like I could argue that Studio Ghibli is ripping on anime. I mean, like there was somebody who created anime and that person could say, well, all of you guys are ripping off. And so I think we have this like recursive problem, which is like, everything is derivative. The question is like, what level of derivative work are we willing to accept as a society so we can have a functional economy? And that is a very difficult question.
Yeah, remixing culture has been part of society since, the caveman days and caveman drawings. I've forgotten more than I remember about Lawrence Lessig and his lectures about copyright and Creative Commons. And Hooman, I don't know if you remember this phenomenon in Silicon Valley back in the Flickr days, in the Ajax and Web 2.0 and social web days. Mashups. And there was this whole culture of marking everything as Creative Commons. And this idea that Disney broke copyright. And that every year Mickey Mouse was going to become public domain, they would lobby the courts and all of a sudden copyright would extend 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And really culture was supposed to be, copyright was supposed to be whatever, 5-10 years. And then people got a chance to remix it. And I remember going to, I think, Lawrence Lessig's last talk about this when I was early in my Silicon Valley days. I believe it was amongst his last lectures. And if you don't know who Lawrence Lessig is, look it up. He gave this beautiful dissertation on the corrosive power of copyright and the enormous culture building power of Creative Commons and sharing and remixing. Now, if you're an artist, that all sounds like, aspirational philosophical nonsense and an excuse to steal and rip and replace. But if you're an artist, I think look into what Disney has done to copyright and what really built culture in art. And you'll find that there's another side to that story. And I'm not making any comment on whether OpenAI is in the right or in the wrong, or whether this, there should be an incentive model and a payment structure for artists. And, Sam and others have said explicitly that, hey, if you ask for something in the form of another artist, maybe there's some kind of mechanism by which that artist gets a few pennies. So I'm not saying none of this is relevant or the commercial side isn't real, but there is this broader philosophical cultural bent that's worth knowing if you're going to be in the public sphere arguing or railing against AI art. It's something, as a matter of education, you should look into it.
I agree with that. And, to your point, like copyright law is not property law. Copyright law and patent law, these intellectual property laws are about balancing the inventor or the creator's right while making sure that the public domain is constantly growing so that we can all stand on each other's shoulders and produce new great works, new inventions, new art, and so on. And so, it drives me crazy when people say, copyright violation is theft. It is literally legally not theft. It's a different offense, right? And these laws are designed to balance the different needs, right? And to your point, Chris, Disney actually weaponized it for most of the 20th century to just make more money beyond really what is in the general public interest. And so I think what this actually comes down to is, for all of these artists who are very unhappy about this, they're unhappy because they're afraid that their livelihood will be taken away from them, right? That the work that they're doing, that the hard work that they're doing is no longer going to be able to make them a living. When you consider all of that, it's not about copyright law isn't this law of nature. It's this compromise, and AI maybe changes the calculus. We need to change how copyright law works, because I think it is true that artists should be able to make money, make a living from their work. It's also true that AI, as with everything else, is just building on top of what has come before. I think it's a really interesting debate. I find whenever a debate is completely defined, the sides are completely defined by the person's background. It's like you nearly know what their opinion is going to be based on, are you an artist? Are you a tech person? Are you into AI? That means it's something fundamental. We're not having an honest intellectual debate. People are just kind of taking their side. So it's something interesting to discuss here, but it's not black and white. And I think that's really sort of a moment where this is going to come up more and more often in the future.
And I think, again, just to kind of get back to the earlier point, I mean, I don't know how familiar with the whole ship of Theseus metaphor, right? And so, okay, for those in the audience that aren't familiar with it, there's a ship, and then you replace one board. Well, we're still going to argue it's the ship, and then you replace another board. Well, it's still the same ship. Well, what if I did it really fast and I replaced all the boards? Is it the same ship? And it's the same argument that's made for, if we were to replace the human mind, and they use this type of philosophical argument. I can apply the same kind of metaphor to art, and you look at this thing, it's both. So let's say, for example, and I am a trained artist, I would to draw, in the style of that studio, and I post it. I think people would say, wow, that's really great. And I don't think the studio would care. Or if I were to be inspired by it and to kind of move in that direction, maybe they wouldn't care. I think part of the reason that they care is because of the scale at which the art can be produced. Okay. And then the second argument is, well, it's trained on my work. Well, I would argue to you, I am a neural network, Hooman, and I view your work and I was to be inspired and drive. You're not intimidated. I am trained on that work. You're not arguing that I can't be doing that. I think it's, again, the scale of the production of the system. And so, again, the open question is, how do you treat AI as a learning system? Because people are saying, well, you're taking my data. Well, I could argue the same thing anytime. I could go on the internet, and I used to do this as a young person. I would copy and learn the styles of all these comic book artists, and I could draw like Jim Lee or Robert Liefeld or whatever. Well, are they going to come after me? And so there is a really, really interesting set of when does a work when is it data that you're trained on, and how do we treat this intelligence? And then what are those rights? And I don't believe that that's going to be a very easy discussion. To your point, I think we have to protect the rights of people to work, but we also have to use some level of discretion. Say, you know what, maybe some of these protections, the copyrights and whatnot, are probably not going to be the protection of the future. My contention is this. I think actually the value of the art is less about the style and more about the limited supply. And it goes back to kind of the crypto arguments of, okay, well, if I could verify that this is actually from this artist and it's a limited edition, how many people have prints of Pablo Picasso? Who cares?
Exactly. You want the original.
We care about the original work. In some way, it might be like when social came out and everyone was mad that everyone was sharing their content without permission. Now people are begging people to post links to stories to drive traffic. Maybe similarly, artists say, wow, this is great. Like, how many people didn't know about this studio? And all of a sudden their profile goes up and all of a sudden people want this limited work. They want the real thing. So it may have an inverse effect where they actually want AI to be trained on it. So it's going to be interesting to see it all play out.
What people want is not the illustration style. What they want is the story of, Hal's Moving Castle or what have you. They want the art, the soul of what's getting done. And just to put a button on what you're saying there, like you're talking about, this is the difference of scale, not a difference of type. And so this is something that's been happening since the beginning of time. It's just when it starts becoming, at global scale and at AI speed, it starts to feel different, but it's actually the same mechanism, just occurring at a much, much faster rate. One last thought on this. It's been mentioned a number of times over the last 2 years since the ChatGPT moment, but it's obviously worth mentioning again here. It is fascinating that we all imagined that AI would first take the boring, mundane, scientific, like number crunching jobs first. And it is this irony of ironies that the first jobs really being taken are the creative jobs. the jobs by these engineers, which we all got retrained to be engineers, by these artists, by these poets, by these copywriters. In the history of like ironic things, of unexpected things, of things that happened in the exact opposite way than we all wondered or assumed they would, it's quite fascinating. It's our ability to predict is very, very limited, especially in today's day and age.
And I think it's going to get worse, actually. I think people need to start to prepare and have a more humble perspective that as these things are accelerating, actually the entropy in this particular system is going to get far worse. And I think all these people who are self-described futurists and all that stuff, it's a bad job to be in right now. It's going to get worse and worse. Your predictions are going to be lower and lower fidelity.
I mean, to be fair, Hooman, it's always been a bad job. Who was it? I think it was a Yogi Berra quote, right? Predictions are hard, especially about the future. Always been true, right? And we lack that humility.
It's interesting because many jobs are actually about predicting the future, about whether predicting, if you're a product manager, predicting how a user will react, if you're a capital allocator, predicting about what markets and startups will succeed, and if you're a futurist, about pontificating and writing and publishing things that people like. This is a serious problem. Now, we've talked about it many times. We're not going to talk about it much more today, but you're right. Entropy is increasing. Rate of change is accelerating. I think everyone's job is at risk. And entire civilizations and interdependencies between cultures and countries is at risk. Everything is at risk. I don't think this is an exaggeration. I don't think that's a catastrophizing to say. And so, we've talked about this many, many times. We'll move on now, but vigilance is key at the moment. If you're an operator, you're a founder, you're an investor, you're just a person in the world.
Vigilance and I guess to your point, humility, right? I guess if we're saying the volatility of the future is increasing, right, we should recognize that and then adapt to it. Not the ideal segue, but I did want to talk about another new foundation model. And I think the way I would fit this in is to talk about that does still seem to be an actual acceleration. If you just think about all the news in AI since January, right, just this year, Google has just released Gemini 2.5 Pro. And this is apparently yet another new high watermark in AI. It apparently outperforms Claude 3.7 in coding, right? So I'm currently leading an engineering organization, and we're like, wow, this stuff just keeps accelerating to actually write good quality code. And so, yeah, I think we don't have to labor this one, but it's just another really exciting moment. And, actually, there is one thing I wanted to point out. We were talking about the uncanny valley before, right? This idea that you can tell that something's AI generated, that it's slop and so on. And that was maybe true 6 to 9 months ago. Now it's cope. The kind of work that AI can produce is as good or better than what most humans can produce. And, you see it's nearly a trope on LinkedIn. There are these posts saying, here are the tells that you can tell something's AI generated. But actually, there was some recent research that's sort of showing that people generally prefer AI generated content. They actually rate AI as more empathetic than humans in a blind test until they're told it's AI. And then they're like, I don't like it anymore, right? So we've kind of crossed the uncanny valley. And in my experiments using Gemini 2.5, I'm like, wow, this thing writes really well. It thinks in a sophisticated way and in a way that a human does. At least the output sort of shows that. So yeah, pretty crazy times.
I think I stand with you on what's been interesting to see is this proverbial arms race of capital, compute, and models. And I still contend that as we're seeing people scale, the real race, it almost reminds me of like race up to mainframes, and they just kept adding, more and more capability. Computers got larger and larger. And I think the real model innovation that I'm excited about, I think people aren't talking about it as much anymore, is what happened with DeepSeek and whatever, as the kind of the sea change that it could potentially introduce. I've already seen, and there's some people working on models that don't have backprop and that can be much smaller. And, ultimately we still have this fundamentally very power efficient machine called the brain. And so we know you can do that. We know that it's possible. And so I'm excited by it. I think it's good. I only got to test it out cursorily, so I didn't have the same kind of depth of experience. But I think what excites me more is the fact that there are these at least three companies that are just continuing to innovate at this rapid pace and pushing each other, pushing the industry forward at the same rate of change. That to me is what's staggering. And it's just, I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. I was talking to some of our mutual founder friends, Chris, that and these are like solid entrepreneurs, people who built unicorns. And so many of them are saying the same version of the same story. It's, I've never been more excited and I've never not been able to see what's going to come up next. Like I have this anxiety that's building up more and more about what's going to happen. And this, like, again, the sea change is occurring. You can see it all coming together, for the first time. So it's really interesting.
We've used this phrase a couple of times on the show, but it's exponentials on top of exponentials, right? The hardware is getting better, the algorithms are getting better, the data acquisition is getting better, the refinement and training is getting better. The use cases are getting broader. This is serious stuff. So I think it's taken as read now that the models will get better, right? Water is wet. The models are getting better. You can take that basically to the bank for the foreseeable future, Moore's law style. We don't know when it ends. The real question now is about use cases, utility, and distribution. And I think that's a good segue actually into a topic we wanted to separate out, but let's just put it all in here, which is Google has just shipped an experiment to some people. And I was one of the lucky few. And I have not personally read any news stories about this.
I've got it as well.
Yeah. AI mode for Google, Google search. So, the key to these things and the key to advantage that a Google, that a Facebook has over an OpenAI is distribution. They own the surfaces, the attention surfaces that people use every day, the workflows, the tools that people use every day. And they've sort of jammed in Gemini in Google Docs, and they've jammed in Gemini in Gmail, and they've jammed in Gemini in, Copilot alongside Office 365. But the crown jewel for Google is search. And in there, they sort of, added some AI answer thing, and it's sort of been janky, and it's sort of got a bit better. But now, for the first time this week, I went to Google on my phone, and it said, "Hey, would you like to try new AI mode?" And the whole thing flipped into a ChatGPT style, Perplexity style LLM interface, chat interface. And Google became ChatGPT, when ChatGPT with search. And I had goosebumps. I was like, holy fuck. This homepage is google.com, has not changed in how long? How long, guys? Has Google been Google? Almost exactly as it's been, with the same "I'm feeling lucky" button. They radically changed it. This is just like an earthquake on the internet. I shouldn't talk about earthquakes this week, but it's just a massive, massive change. And so this is really Google, assuming this experiment rolls out and wins and becomes part of their core UX. This is Google saying, yeah, conversation is the future, LLM is the future, and we're not going to sprinkle it into the top of the 10 links. We're going to replace the 10 links. Hooman, you said you saw this. What do you make of it? Is it as dramatic as I'm saying?
It's interesting. I had a similar reaction in the sense that, so for the last couple weeks, I'd been, talking to friends, and we had been discussing the future of Perplexity. Okay. And I think it's a company that has done amazing work. I think that they've really kind of created a great interface for research, but I continually am reminded maybe I'm just at this point where I have enough cycles. I'm like, look, Google has the distribution, Facebook has the distribution. And, you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because GPT and Anthropic have been consistently upgrading their interface to include web search, and they're making it better and better and better. So you have one side, and these guys are well heeled. Obviously, we just saw the announcement on, and I think we're going to talk about that with OpenAI, right? That was an insane fundraise. You just look at it and it's like, I can't believe we live in a world where a private company is raising like that. It's staggering. And then on the flip side, you have Google, who is, they made a transformer model, for Christ's sake. Like this is their game. Like I remember when Eric Schmidt announced type-out search, and everyone was flipping their shit because they thought, oh my God, they're going to ruin the click-through rate. They're going to ruin the marketplace. Like that was fairly disruptive at that point, if you guys remember. Mm-hmm. And then I think what I was suggesting was, like, at some point, Google is going to put in this mode or something and say, hey, we're just going to keep testing it. And I honestly, I give them a lot of credit. I did not think that they had the courage to do that. Put it at the top. By the way, I don't know about you, but it's on my far left. And most people who are Western audiences and people who are UX designers, you understand the boldness of that move. They actually put it number one. So that is going to cannibalize the core search, which means they're going to start seeing it. I give them credit. I think it was good. And honestly, it was an interesting first experience. What I will say, which is, and for those of us who drive growth in marketing, this is going to accelerate an already continuing trend, which is SEO as we know it is gone. I mean, he's gone. I don't know if you guys are seeing this in companies that you work on, but anyone who's been dependent on this, building QA style content, blog posts. Luckily, my company is not so dependent on it, but I had companies in my portfolio and they've just seen the search volume drop. And I think if this succeeds, it's going to change the game. I just don't know how this impacts Google. It's so bold that they're doing this because I'm sure they're running the math, but can you imagine it's the largest click market in the world and they're just saying, okay, we're going to change it.
Yeah. So actually, I want to press on that a little bit, Hooman, and I don't know what I believe yet, but I want to be devil's advocate for a second. I don't think this breaks SEO. I think it breaks traffic, but it may accelerate qualified leads. So let me explain what I mean. In order for the LLM to have an opinion or be able to point users with a question to the right place, the LLM's crawler needs to find you. So that means that SEO is still relevant because you still need to be in the index, you still need to rank high, you still need the LLM's crawler to decide your page is worth looking at, your information is worth trusting. So SEO doesn't die. It's traffic volumes that die because there aren't millions and millions of people who need to read your website. It's just the LLM that needs to read your website and explain it to millions of people. But maybe while the traffic plummets, qualified leads are maintained or increased for high quality businesses. Now, that's a huge maybe, huge, right? Some people, their business is based on traffic, ads and what have you, media companies and so on. But if you're offering a transactional service that is not some B2B SaaS that could get generated on the fly by the LLM, that it manipulates the real world. I'm thinking Uber, Airbnb, what have you, or a massive multiplayer game like Facebook, Instagram, video games.
Or like business SaaS tools. I mean, there's a lot. I don't disagree. Yeah.
In that case, then you don't need all that traffic. You just need the users. And maybe that you're in an okay spot in that regard. So what do you guys think? It's you got to separate SEO from traffic, from sales, and there's a different answer for each of those things.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So, I had a page rank 10 for my last company, and I'm pretty deep on the SEO side. What I meant by the statement, and I'm not disagreeing with your posit, is that it's a disruptive to the model. So the current way that everything is working, okay, you're probably going to see the volume is going to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's also going to change the nature of where traffic is going to move. So to your point, for some cases, and I think most certainly you're seeing companies, for example, leap after it and say, hey, you need the AI SEO. And I think they're still trying to agree on what the term is, but some version of that optimized for ChatGPT, Anthropic, and what have you, because they are quote unquote going to drive traffic. Perplexity, all these others are going to drive traffic. I think Ahmad at Mercury had mentioned that they were starting to see spikes in traffic, small, but like from some of these engines. So I think there's an optimization there. And I do believe you're right that in certain cases, yes, your volume might be lower, but it's all about qualified leads. At the end of the day, are you going to make more money or less money using this as a traffic source? So that's what you care about. The thing is certain businesses are going to be decimated regardless. Like if I'm in the business of Quora or I'm in the business of Stack Overflow. God, I don't even know if kids are using that anymore, but like things that like we used to use, like when I was coding and stuff, like I think that's tough. That's tough when you're in that business because, if I'm sitting and doing the query, I get the answer in context and like they're actually putting in there. So I think some businesses are going to be destroyed through the creative destructive process. Some businesses, because they maintain they're going to be like our business, for example, a collective, like they're not going to just generate that in GPT today. And so I think what we're thinking of optimizing is, well, we want to be top recommended. We want to be top ranked. We want to be, because they are going to ultimately make a decision and we want to make it easy for them to find us. Right. And so I just think it's going to be so disruptive. And then the question is, Google's a public company, right? And so when you have the fundamental engine, your crown jewel, being reworked underneath you, what does that do? Like, at what point are these guys going to put out a report say traffic is changing on the internet? And it's just so, I've never seen anything like it's like an earthquake underneath the largest country on the internet.
Look, I often talk on this show about how, in my view, Google is not a massively well-run company. And I believe that sort of in the micro and mid-level, but at the macro, in terms of like strategy, like capital S strategy, Google has always been pretty good, right? Like they saw all the different waves of disruption coming. There've already been a few, right? I think the most notable one being mobile, and navigated them pretty well. Chrome and Android and Google Maps, all of these things have been like these strategic defensive plays that have not been like a profit center at all, but have been these sort of complex strategic chess moves to defend that core river of gold, that advertising business. That has been Google's playbook actually for decades now. And because of that, I kind of believe in their ability to make that transition. Because remember, mobile was a threat to Google in two ways, right? The first way was simply losing control of the platform, right? That it was going to be Apple's world, or maybe Apple and Microsoft's world, and they would lose control of distribution. So Android was an amazing defensive play for that. But the second thing, and I remember because I was there at the time, was the transition from desktop search to mobile search, producing far lower revenue, right? Far lower CTRs and things like that. There was less screen real estate. There was a whole bunch of worry in the industry saying, hey, Google is going to lose a lot of money in this transition to mobile search. And spoiler alert, they didn't. So past performance is no indication of future performance, but I'd say they're actually very clever at playing this big game and protecting their ad revenue. And so I reckon you'll see some really clever stuff happening.
I agree with you. I think, look, dangerous to bet against Google. And I think some of these, if you've learned anything from the cycles, these large incumbents have so many, they have so much redundancy in the revenue stream. Their market capitalization is high. So they have their stock as a tool to do acquisition. They have compute. I mean, they have all the advantages. So I for sure don't know that it is a Google is dead moment. In fact, I would say far from it. I think Google has plenty of time and cycles to adjust and frankly copy these other folks. The open question I have is in those other motions you discussed, like first of all, they bought their whole ad stack. They bought DoubleClick, they bought Invite, they bought Maps. Like they've done some amazing work. I actually I credit them tremendously in the same way you do. It's just, I don't think they've ever been struck down the nose, with something that's their core business. And I don't know that you can model yet. And if anyone can, it's Google because they have the data, how this is going to shift the dynamic of the search market, right?
Yeah.
And the paid market. I think what you'll probably see, if Chris, you're right, and the volumes change to the lower, I think the CTRs go up, right? But maybe the overall ad spend stayed the same, right? Like, because we're, you know what I mean? Like it's a marketplace. So I think regardless what a movie to watch, right? Google's been punched in the nose and they're responding. I've never seen it in my life. So it's pretty cool.
Here's how I think about Google not as a search engine. For a long time, maybe always, I've thought of Google as Cognition in the cloud. They are the cloud intelligence company. And in a world where we are outsourcing more and more of our cognition to the cloud in the form of what we now call generative AI, large language models, no one has done this better, and no one is in a position to do it better moving forward. Now, the primary mechanism and monetization model of their cognition has been search. That's been the primary interface. But it doesn't have to be. They have Google Home in your home. They have Google Nest slittered throughout your home. They have Android. They have now a new robotics department, a logistics and car company. They are going to express that cognition everywhere. And they also now have Google, they also have GCP, right? So they're going to power all cognition everywhere, or at least divide and conquer between Microsoft, OpenAI, Apple and them. And I don't know how they monetize it. I don't know what it's called. I don't know where all the volumes come from and where the splits occur. But in a world where we are outsourcing labor, cognitive labor and physical labor to the big magnificent seven, Google gets 1/7 of the global economy, or some mix of that, somewhere in there. I'm pretty confident about that, and I think that they're in perfectly fine shape.
I think you're right. I think just again back to it's because they're a public company. We have to validate this, and maybe I'll use so you guys can check this. But when I last checked, and this was a bit ago, I think it's like order of magnitude. Search ad volume is like 60% of their business. So it just depends on how disruptive this is, in my opinion. And if the market cap drops enough, and things happen, we just don't know the nature of what this means for them. I think, again, they have diversified revenue. They have all these other things. I'm not disagreeing that they're in a position to do, but Microsoft in some ways is better positioned because they have enterprise. And so like, they're not as subject to the disruption of AI hitting their near-term models, in some ways,
I don't know about that. I think in a world where these models can generate a lot of software on their own, where they can drive further disintegration of old structures, freelance, independent work, entrepreneurship, the corporations start to become, looser and looser ties. And we all start working, on our own stuff on the fly, wishing on the LLM genie and getting what we want. I think the future is consumer. I think the future is personal. And I think Google and Apple are in a great place for that. And I think Apple has shat the bed. I've said this many, many, many episodes ago, many months ago, that Apple's obsession with privacy and local on-device stuff is going to bite them in the ass. And it is biting them in the ass. Siri is a piece of shit. They are months and months behind, and Google is coming up and owning.
How do you really feel?
It's a piece of shit, and I think they're struggling with their whole like what's private, what's public, how much data can we use, what's personal content. They're struggling with all of this stuff, and Google doesn't have any of that debt, any of that kind of cognitive debt, the promise and the company brand. They're in a really strong position. I'm not saying like all of a sudden, Microsoft goes away, Apple goes away. I'm just saying Google is in a very, very strong position as a consumer devices and AI company. That's very, very powerful.
Yeah, fair. I was more commenting along the lines of market cap stability, right? So if they navigate it, I think they're in a good position.
But the other thing, Hooman, like one difference between Google and Microsoft is that Google has a dual class shareholder structure. So they are public, but Larry, Sergey, and Eric still actually control the company. So, while on the one hand, they've shown quite a lot of discipline around stock price and all the sort of Wall Street games. I think if they see an existential threat, they're actually empowered to ignore shareholders and do what they got to do. And we'll see if that's actually what happens.
It's a good catch and a good point. And it is a tool that we haven't seen them have to bring to bear.
That's right. But, if you're a Google shareholder, you're just along for the ride, even if you have a major shareholding.
And Facebook.
Yep, and Facebook. Let's move on. That was a really great discussion. One other bit of news from the AI world in terms of technical, or this is an ecosystem development really, is that OpenAI have announced support for MCP, which is the Model Context Protocol, which is kind of an open protocol to allow AI agents to talk to one another and to talk to basically nearly like an API interface for LLMs, right? And it came out of Anthropic. OpenAI have now announced support for it. It means this is now a de facto standard, which I think is really interesting and another exciting accelerator for the AI ecosystem. But keen to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Open standards. Never heard of those things. This has been the dream, right? Is the idea that there's some kind of standardized protocol for discovering, connecting, and accessing third-party data sources and services. This has been the dream since year zero of the internet, year zero of computing. Maybe Hooman, you and I were engaged in this conversation, this battle, this dream for many years. Some of the people in the audience know I helped coin and popularize the phrase data portability and some of the open standards, and we've been trying to drive at something like this for a long, long time. And so now this idea that these major companies all need their LLMs to access basically RAG, their retrieval augmented generation for your personal data, and they don't want to battle on the layer of abstraction called data access, and they've just standardized in an open model. That's fantastic. And so MCP is called Model Context Protocol, which is a fancy way of saying a standard way for the model to access your data. And for you as a third-party data provider or functionality provider to expose that data to the models. This is amazing. It's awesome. It's great. And it brings us closer to a world where you have less lock-in and more liquidity and freedom in your personal utilities. So I'm very excited about it. Have you dug into this, Hooman? Have you looked into the underlying protocol and the way it works?
Yeah, I think the implementation is where I'm curious about. So there's the new company that I think I want to say Google or capital G back called Dev Agents. Hugo's new company that it's a bunch of really great people. They raised like $40 million. I'm curious to see how this fits into like a multi-agent context. To me, the real power in the agentic world is collaboration, right? And how do these agents hand off data? And we actually, a lot of those protocols that you were referring to before, like OAuth, for example, are going to be the building blocks of this, right? And so you're going to have OpenAI and you're going to OAuth into these other resources, right? And currently you're OAuthing and saying maybe, okay, for example, to have data portability, but then you might OAuth and then you layer this on and say, okay, well, we are going to have permission to talk, like literally back and forth. So I think I'm curious to see how, again, the implementation, I think it's a great first step to have a standard, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but I think the real thing is like, okay, how are you actually going to implement these things? Because there's non-determinism in these agents and how they pass data back and forth and when they start and stop. And, there's a lot of security attacks that are going to occur when you look at these types of things that are happening, right? Like overloading context windows, or I don't know, like there's going to be weird stuff that happens and I'm not quite sure. So I've only looked at it cursorily, but I think the implementation is when I'm going to get really excited. And I'd like to see some of, some examples of some of these, like when it starts getting fancy, but it's exciting for sure.
I mean, I think one of the things, like with a lot of stuff in AI, is I'm seeing very rapid adoption, right? So it's like, yes, I think those are valid questions, Hooman, but the thing that's happening is everyone. Like, I'm just seeing a lot of usage of this thing. And so pretty quickly, whether it's good or not, it's sort of like JavaScript, right? Like adoption is the game with new technical standards. And, I feel like it's running away with it pretty fast. And in this accelerated AI timeline, I reckon within a couple of months, we'll know whether this is, the protocol we'll be using for the next decades. But it's looking likely from my point of view. And this piece of news about OpenAI is them conceding that point too, I would say.
I think you're right. It has a really good shot. And I think checking in on a couple months, you'll see again, if it gets implemented by the right few players, game on. It was like OAuth. I mean, once that thing was out, it was over.
I'm finding myself becoming a little bit of a maximalist or a purist when it comes to these LLMs, that at a certain point of maturity, the LLM will generate a lot of software for you on the fly. And you won't think of it as software development the same way you don't think of a Google Doc as publishing, desktop publishing, right? It's just a doc, you spin it up in a fraction of a second, you write some shit down. I think the LLMs are going to generate a lot of software for you on the fly, and that software is going to get more and more sophisticated. And I don't know why you need some of the B2B SaaS, some of the software, even consumer software we've had traditionally built by hand and lovingly handcrafted. Similarly here, I don't know why a lot of protocols are necessary in a true agentic world where the AI knows your intent, your needs, your sensitivities, your concerns, and your personal AI can't just, connect with your airline AI and say, hey, my guy wants to go on a plane. He likes the aisle seat. He likes to be up front. He likes to be over the wing. He doesn't like to give his credit card out, but given that this is a high intent, high trust brand, I'm going to give you his credit card and I'm going to tell you his food preferences because I think that's probably the right judgment call here. And, oh no, I'm not going to give you his bank details and whatever. I think that there's a world at which the protocol is English, the privacy model is reasoning, and the actors involved are a private agent interacting with an enterprise agent or what have you. And it sort of all just happens magically. This might be reductive. It might be overly simplifying the equation, but I think there's a world where a lot of it just plays out like that. I'm reminded of Sam Altman early in the journey, where he said, this whole AI safety thing, at some point, when it comes to something like racism, we might just have to end up saying to the model, hey, don't be racist. Like the alignment problem is just asking it to do something. And then it figures out what does that mean? And, it knows kind of the subtleties and nuances of what racism looks like and goes, okay, I'm just not going to do that. That's the instruction I've been given.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a great example of the problem, right? If I told 10 random people over the world, don't be racist, I think the interpretation of that is quite different. And I think that is where, I don't know the protocol solves that. I agree with you that once you get to a certain level of intelligence, the reason you need a lot of protocols is because these things are on average, when you have software and web services that are interacting, they don't have autonomy, right? That is part of the level, and we have to have some trust.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, all those APIs, which we both have been deep in REST API.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you. I think you start to move away from that system. My only point is like that racist kind of example is actually a good one. Is like, I don't think we have standards. The challenge in alignment is I don't believe society is aligned, and I think that is where you're gonna, like, you can have whatever APIs and protocols that you want. We still fundamentally as a society aren't aligned. Like, I can argue to you that people would say, like, look at the in liberal and conservative. Like, we don't have alignment, and that is the problem. How could you build an aligned system when we are not aligned?
This is the thing, an argument I've been making for a long, long time, and I love this argument, which is this thing that Facebook and social media broke the world, and I've been arguing that it's certainly applied a lot of pressure, but what it's also done is reveal a broken world. It's revealed the tribalism and the myopicness and the parochialness of human nature. It's our tools are reflecting us, and we don't like what we see. And so I love what you're saying, Hooman, which is this question of alignment is a question of, well, aligning to what? And if we can't get aligned with each other, how can we expect the AI to align not only to each of us, but to our civilization and society en masse? Boy, oh boy, that is a question for the ages.
Oh boy.
Okay, for our final topic today, we wanted to talk about market developments. It's sort of been a tale of two cities this week. On one hand, OpenAI has raised $40 billion. Just by way of comparison, some of the last record-breaking raises was Stripe for $6.5 billion, SpaceX $2 billion, ByteDance $5 billion, Databricks $1.6 billion. At Uber, when we were raising $1 or $2 billion at a time, that was seen as like, holy shit, what the hell is going on? To raise $40 billion in one go is just, insane amounts of money. But I think everyone can understand how and why that's happening. That was an evaluation of $300 billion post money. But on the same week, at the same time, we're also seeing the CoreWeave IPO, which was, by all accounts, a pretty big failure and huge market volatility. The Magnificent Seven is down 20-some%. It's going down to the right pretty rapidly. Everyone is running for the exits. It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt all over the place. You can blame tariffs, you can blame, bubbles popping, you can blame whatever you like. But it is really, in the private markets, huge money, huge valuations for one of the most important companies of the decade, of the world, of the history, really. And another quote unquote AI play, CoreWeave, and the AI, Magnificent Seven, all going pretty rapidly down to the right. Hooman, you are a deeply experienced entrepreneur, capital allocator. You've seen all this stuff from the inside. What do you make of these two dichotomous signals? And what should we make of it? And where are we going in the short term, and the medium term, and the long term?
So I think with OpenAI, I think you're seeing the cementing, or at least the support, cementing in the winner, if you will, from the valley. So for better or for worse, the stage is set. And I do think in the next 2 to 3 years, and I'm actually going to assume the next year, you're going to start seeing them using this war chest to decimate the startup ecosystem at this point. So you're going to see the culling coming, in particular as they release their agents. My prediction is that it probably starts with the high profile developer agent that they're building, and we'll see how the resilience of the Cursors and Windsurf, and they're great products. I'm not suggesting that they're bad companies, but the ones that went to 0 to 100 million really quickly, let's see what the resilience are. So the question is, are they going to have their proverbial Netscape moment where, OpenAI is call it the Microsoft of the world, and we'll see what happens there. That's one. On the flip side, I think you're starting to see the correction on the public markets. And I do think, to your point, Chris, there's a lot. We could unpack this on a whole episode, if you will, because that's tougher. But I think there was a huge movement of capital into, the Mag 7. And I do think we're seeing, at least at the minimum, the correction there, where people are saying, all right, wait, we got to hold back. CoreWeave in and of itself My personal opinion is I don't know if that's indicative of the market. I think you have a data center company that got valued as an AI company, and you're just seeing the market rationalize it like it's a data center company. So I almost treat that as an outlier. It doesn't bode well necessarily for the IPO market, but I don't think in and of itself it's a sole data point. We have to see Klarna and others to really get there. I don't envy the going public in this choppy market. It's not the safest sea to go out from port.
I actually think this bodes really well for the public market, because what I don't think we're seeing is what I would classify as irrational exuberance. I think, in the .com era, you put .com at the end of any word or string of words, and it was, worth infinity. It would go up and to the right. They had no business model, no revenue, no nothing, massive costs. And I think the market is sort of digesting a CoreWeave and going, no, that's not an AI company. No, thank you. And, and looking at an NVIDIA or a Microsoft or a Google and going, no, we're not going to let that get ahead of its skis. We're going to just bring the PE ratio down a little. And everyone seems utterly paranoid about the next .com bubble and the irrational exuberance and the ZERPy FOMO. And I think that's just keeping everything in check in a really healthy way. And NVIDIA is actually quite cheap. It's really cheap. It's cheaper than AMD and Intel, I think, but based on just forward, PE. And so I think this is actually really good news. And I think that as long as we maintain a kind of clear-eyed optimism, continue to roll out infrastructure, continue to rotate and roll over the world economy to AI, I think us in tech, us as maybe more professional capital allocators, and then just retail investors using Robinhood. I think this is good for everything. The only question is, can Mr. Pro Growth, Pro Business Trump continue to rattle everyone's cages and end us in some place that seems vaguely stable? That's the question mark for me.
To take the opposite side of that, though, Chris, I think that there is a case to be made that we have a bubble here, or at least a level of exuberance that's only going to pay off if the optimism around AI turns out to be true. If you look at the AI industry writ large, it is still a burner of capital. Why does OpenAI need to raise $40 billion? That's because they're burning money like it's going out of fashion. You can say the same of any highly valued AI startup, right? They are spending a lot more money than they're making. And I think that then, second order, flows through to NVIDIA. You're like, well, why is NVIDIA not more highly valued? It's because although they are highly profitable, their profits are still coming at the expense of VCs, right? Do you remember the golden days of like food delivery and all of that stuff? They call it the VC dividend, right? We as normal citizens are basically being subsidized by VCs pouring money into these cash burning machines, right? We're subsidized by VCs. NVIDIA is getting subsidized by VCs. And so the question is, at some point, this industry needs to start returning huge amounts of capital to make up for the huge amounts of capital that have come in through investment. And if that doesn't happen, that will look not unlike a bubble bursting, right? And so I think fundamentally, probably within the three of us and a lot of our listeners, we would say we are AI optimists. And so at some point, the value generation, the value capture will catch up to all of the capital that's been deployed. But we're not there yet, and things could go wrong.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think I agree with you very strongly. We have to distinguish in the public market and the private market. They're related, correlated, but not necessarily always moving in sync. I think what the public market has said with CoreWeave is, okay, fundamentally, I still think actually, if you look at it as only a data center company, potentially, and I think it's a good business. I don't say that I'm not trying to comment on the quality of the business. I'm just saying the multiple relative to data center companies is fairly high still, just to be clear. It's always been high. I mean, they buy chips, they buy land, they deploy it. Like there's DigitalOcean, $6 billion company, right? Like, so you could study that and say, hey, how is this fairly valued? Can other companies go order chips and put them in the data center? Yeah, sure, they could. But I think when we look at AI itself, I think when you look at the liquidity point that you made is a really salient one. Right now, we're still fairly liquid. Wiz was a great, or is hopefully going to be like this great outcome that's starting to drive liquidity. But, you have so many people who are waiting on liquidity here. And I think the AI in particular, and I am definitely all for AI in the agentic future. I just cannot see a world where this doesn't end pretty badly for quite a few investments. You can't have 100 foundational model companies that are going to all be worth what OpenAI is. It's just like not possible. If you really truly believe in this AI enabled world, there have to be some brutal losses that are going to occur. And I think there's too much capital that's deployed against these AI strategies too fast. And that is the nature of it. And I do think we're going to have a bubble, and I do think you're going to have some correction. The question is not to me, this is my opinion, whether or not there's a correction or not on the AI space. And I think simultaneously AI is going to succeed and there's going to be a correction. The question is, what's the nature of that correction? When's it going to happen? Because like I'm, looking in venture, how many companies are getting $100 million pre-s with like 5 dudes in another foundational model? You just look at the rate of change and you just can't have it. It's not, they're going to hit the public market, and OpenAI is the best and the biggest ever. And they're just now like trying to tap and cross 20 billion. That's cool. But like Google's looking at it like, come on, man, like 20 billion, like hand me my beer,
Yeah, no, this is the most important part here is we need to separate public and private. So what I was referring to was the public markets. So in the private markets with VC, there is absolutely irrational exuberance. There are people just piling into deals, oversubscribed deals, paying whatever valuation. That's no question there. What I'm talking about is in the public side, and you talked about VCs funding this, Yaniv. When it comes to NVIDIA revenue, according to ChatGPT here, 70-80% of NVIDIA's revenue is coming from the Magnificent Seven. It's not coming from startups. It's not it's 5 or 10%. So this is not VC money pumping things. This is balance sheets of these massive players who had massive, war chests, dry powder, and have been trying to figure out how to deploy it somewhere because they didn't know what to do with it. And they finally, the moment has come. They're like, okay, we have a massive platform shift. We have a chance to, as I said earlier, take over cognition globally, all intelligence everywhere for physical and mental labor. And they're going, there's no amount of money you can spend on this that won't be paid back. That's their bet, right? And they're spending their balance sheet on this while making record-breaking profits year after year. Their PEs are not that expensive, so their valuations are justified, and they're all pouring their capital into NVIDIA, and NVIDIA's PE is fairly conservative for a high growth startup. Now, where I can see a bubble forming is if they decide, well, we've finished rolling out this infrastructure, or we're overbuilding or something, we need to massively back off. Now NVIDIA suddenly looks like there's something pops there. But my bet is that when you start running the world's cognition, that's more GPUs, not less. And that is another 10, 20 year cycle of compute infrastructure build out. So when I talk about things feeling relatively clear-eyed, I'm talking about a build out for an economy changing platform shift by companies that are making serious money, that have serious cash on their balance sheets, and they're spending it to do a serious transition with valuations not overinflated on the public markets. This feels pretty good to me on the public side. On the private side, it's a shit show. That's a different story.
Oh yeah, I would say, look, on the public market side, I'd say your points are well received. I mean, these companies, these mega platform companies, the only thing that can stop them is regulation at this point. So I do think they're well considered and they're going to do well. I do think the private markets are going to hit a wall in terms of this particular AI wave.
All right, awesome. This has been another supercharged conversation at the intersection of tech, politics, culture, capital, you name it. This is Hooman. It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show. How can people find you on the internet?
I am at Hooman Radfar. I'm very Googleable. Not many Hoomans in tech, so come find me.
Yaniv, how can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring and totalitarian place. So love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. I will accept your request. And you, Chris?
You can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad or over chrissaad.com. All right, guys, another great conversation as always.
Thank you. No, it was fun.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.